invite you to, those who are not already seated, to take your seats and start by welcoming you warmly to this session and congratulating you for having braved the rain, which is was quite extensive. My name is Lina Wendland. I work in the UN Human Rights Office, where I lead the work on business and human rights. And it is my very great pleasure to be moderating this panel on business inclusion. So I've worked on the business and human rights agenda for many years, and it is indeed very timely, if not overdue, to have a session at the annual forum that explores the interface between the business and human rights agenda and the agenda for inclusion in the workplace of persons with disabilities. It is an underexplored, or has been an underexplored area in the business and human rights context. And I was just told that actually for the last 3 years, there has been attempts to have a session like this at the forum. So I'm really delighted that, that we are managing to do this. As everyone in the room will be aware, persons with disabilities have faced historical barriers in the workplace, 25% lower employment rate, and a number of other issues for those who are employed. So it really is it's a problem on a scale that is significant and really requires careful efforts to overcome it. As you know, the overarching theme of this forum is on the role of governments. So we are focusing not only on what businesses can do, but also the overall framing of the roles and responsibilities and efforts that governments can make to support this agenda. So the aim of the session, as you will have seen from the concept note, is to identify good practice to promote employment of persons with disabilities and to consolidate the business case for inclusion. In the business and human rights space, we always want to try to explore the business case and promote the business case. Sometimes there isn't one, and we have to be honest about that and say to companies there are certain practices that are unacceptable whether or not there is a business case. But really, I think for this particular area of the business and human rights agenda, there really are very strong business case that can be presented to companies to promote the further inclusion. We have an excellent panel that presents a number of perspectives on the issue. We have government voice, private sector, disability movement, national business and disability networks, and international cooperation agencies. So we will really get a rich range of perspectives and experiences to inform our discussions. So the flow of the session, we have until 10:15. We will start by the panelist presentations, and then there is we will open the floor for Q&A, and we then have a closing statement as well on behalf of the International Disability Alliance. I should say that the session is webcast and there will be live captioning, and that the links to the webcast will be posted on the IDA website from tomorrow, I understand. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to our first speaker, Eleni. And I was so good at pronouncing your last name, I'll see if I can do it again, Teodoru. Who has a hybrid background in both the private and the public sector. She's worked for companies such as Nestle, but also done work with the UN. So Eleni, you have the floor and you have about 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is a real honor to be in this historical building with these distinguished panelists. Thank you for having me and for the invitation. I will start by saying that there are more than 1 billion people with disabilities around the world, representing over $1.2 trillion in disposable income. There are more than 1 billion customers and consumers with disabilities around the world, representing, including their families and environment, $8.1 trillion in disposable income. A study published by OHCHR in 2018 and an article published by the World Economic Forum mentioned that companies employing persons with disabilities stand above the average in terms of profitability and value creation. Isn't it the core promise of the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals to leave no one behind? I'm telling you to not filter us out. My name is Eleni Theodorou, and I'm a young talent with a disability. What does that mean? I have worked in CSR, government affairs, corporate engagement, community building, for companies like Nestlé through an innovation competition, did projects with Unilever and United Nations in the headquarters and the field. And I have a love for impact investing and venture philanthropy. When I was a child, I was affected by childhood cancer, which caused for me to lose one of my eyes. This is a prosthetic one. And for the other one, through therapies, to lose a big part of my vision. That means I have a visual impairment. So what happens when I go to an interview? Every time I have to go with two hats, either as a young talent with a competitive background or as a person with a disability. When I mention my disability, the power balance changes. A recent example of a consultancy that approached me for a job, and I was very actually happy about it. They sent me the recruitment test, and it was not inclusive. Even though I scored very high in problem solving, their spatial awareness part, it was not possible for me to be done because you need vision for that, right? So so I got filtered out. Is the recruitment process of the businesses inclusive? Is the AR they're using for the recruitment tests inclusive? Are they filtering valuable talent out? And I'm telling them to not filter us out, to invest in us. Why? Because they can unlock an amazing human capital with talents that have been through research proved that people with disabilities have more perseverance, problem-solving skills, agility, foresight, innovative way of finding solutions, and they like to experiment because they have to face challenges every day. And insight in consumer behaviors. Through having employee resource groups, you can actually develop universal design for your products. That means that you can make your products more inclusive, and you can actually, open your company into, as mentioned before, more than $8 trillion market. So, furthermore, to do that, you need leadership, and to need leadership, you need sponsorship. That means that you really have the executives of your company to follow and be part of this movement so that your employees can disclose their disabilities. And through that, the employer attractiveness will go higher. Be the company that everybody wants to work for. And finally, of course, the non-financial reporting. It's obligatory for companies more than 500 employees, especially in the European Union, and more investors are asking for ESG integration. That means that you will have more and more opportunities for investments. There are no disabled people. That's what I'm saying today. There are disabled tools, environments, and workspaces. Invest in tools and unlock an amazing human capital. However, make real investments to get real return. Investments in two levels, as mentioned. Capital for the solutions and sponsorship from the top to the bottom of the organization. Some best practices is Microsoft that really investing in capturing talent with autism because of their coding skills, but also Firmenich that is focusing on people with visual impairments and their acute senses for their flavor and taste products. Only when you do disability, you really do diversity. Only 4% of the businesses that mention that they do diversity, they actually include disability. I'm telling you today to think beyond CSR because inclusive business is good business and inclusive business is sustainable business. And if you really want to know what are the solutions and how to do it, ask them. Ask the people with disabilities, your employee resource groups, and engage social enterprises that have the solutions. And most likely they're founded by people with disabilities, and invest in them through corporate impact investment. Thank you very much. I think I passed my minutes. Thank you for your attention.
You did very well on the timing, and thanks for such a compelling business, setting out really very compelling, strong business case, and also the role of investors and the contributions and the untapped resources and markets that are left behind if this potential is not realized. So thanks very much for that. I will now pass on to Carla Bonino, who is CSR and Sustainability Head of Unit at Fondation ONCE. At Fondation ONCE, among others, she coordinates the European Initiative Disability Hub Europe that is co-funded by the European Social Fund. Carla, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here as well, and thank you very much to the UN and all the entities involved in this panel for organizing this session needed. Nowadays, I represent the ONCE Foundation, which is a foundation based in Spain, and its main objective is to promote the quality of life of people with disabilities and their families, based on programs on training, employment, and accessibility. The ONCE Foundation is founded by ONCE, the National Organization of the Blind in Spain, which turned 80 years last year. And together, altogether, ONCE Foundation, and Ilunion Business Social Group compose the ONCE Social Group, which comprise more than 73,000 employees, 58% with disabilities. Having said this, the purpose of my presentation is to share the main ideas of publication, making the future of work inclusive of people with disabilities. Is the first document that puts together two debates, the future of work and the reality of people with disabilities. It has been jointly developed by the ONCE Foundation and the ILO Global Business and Disability Network, with the co-funding of the European Social Fund. All this in the framework of the initiative Disability Hub Europe, promoted by the ONCE Foundation, and with the aim of working on the binomial sustainability and disability in alignment with the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda. The objective of the publication is to contribute to the visibility of persons with disabilities in the debates of the future of work, and to expose the urgency of taking action in order to seize opportunities and address challenges that the megatrends of the future of work will bring. All of this in order to achieve an inclusive future of work of persons with disabilities, representing 1 billion people in the world, as Eleni introduced. The publication has been developed with the participation of experts from more than 20 different organizations, including the OECD, the UN Global Compact, the International Disability Alliance, and other private companies and entities. The publication itself is a contribution to the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Goal 8, on decent work and economic growth, and Target 8.5, which specifically mentions people with disabilities, related to productive employment and decent work for all. I have no other option but to be very, very short on the publication that you can consult outside. There are a few copies, and also it can be downloaded at the ILO Global Business and Disability website, the Fundación ONCE website, and also Disability Hub Europe website. The publication gives an overview of work and disability, stating, as you know, the labor participation being significantly low compared to people without disabilities, and also highlighting some challenges that persist and are not specific to the future of work, but do have to be addressed. a general lack of enabling environment, including physical disability, that should not be forgotten. It analyzes 5 so-called mega trends of the future of work in relation to what the challenges are to people with disabilities and what opportunities they bring, being them the technological revolution, the skills revolution involved, the cultural change relating to sustainability, for example, the demographic change and the climate change being very important nowadays. It ends with a roadmap for an inclusive future of work in which 5 key objectives are identified, and I will share them as the closing remark of my intervention. Identifying which actions should be taken by the different stakeholders involved. This means public authorities, the corporate sector, of course, disability NGOs and representative organizations, the trade unions, and academia. They all have to take part to make an inclusive world of work for people with disabilities. So the key objectives for ensuring inclusion that have been identified in this publication are the following. 1, new forms of employment and employment relations in the context of the future of work need to integrate disability inclusion. 2, skills development and lifelong learning related to the future of work has to be made inclusive of people with disabilities. 3, universal design has to be embedded in development of all new infrastructure products and services from the beginning. 4, assistive technologies existing and newly developed have to be made affordable and available. And 5, measures to include people with disabilities in growing and developing areas of economy, for example, the green economy. Some actions, of course, are stated in the publication, are transversal to all stakeholders. Gender equality needs to be taken into account, of course, in all the actions taken, and multilateral collaborations between all stakeholders, persons with disabilities, and included is necessary. And this is even a reflection of SDG number 17 on partnerships for a sustainable future in 2030. Just to finish, I would like to share that this publication should be seen as the beginning of a journey that requires the involvement and collaboration of all stakeholders to take concrete action to ensure a future of work that is inclusive of people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla, for bringing the attention, also the linkages made, very important linkages to the other global agendas, notably the 2030 agenda, climate change, demographic changes, etc. And I think it goes to really demonstrate how this is an integrated, this issue really needs to be integrated in the consideration of all these other major global debates that is having. So thank you for highlighting that, and also the concrete recommendations that I think will be very useful. So I'm now turning to my right, Dylan Winder, who has worked in the Department for International Development, DFID, for over 20 years, and is currently the Humanitarian and Protracted Crisis Counselor and Team Leader at the UK Mission to the United Nations in Geneva. Dylan.
Thanks very much, Lena, and it's fantastic that we've been invited to participate in this panel. Ensuring empowerment and inclusion for people with disabilities is a top UK priority, and in particular, as I think Emily said, through our aid programme to leave no one behind. Places we work are increasingly complex. Conflict, protracted crisis, forced displacement, climate change are all areas that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But the issue of inclusion in business is also critically important, and even in these contexts we need to look at how people with disabilities can be better included in the economy. A couple of key facts, and I'm sure you all know these. I mean, obviously people with disabilities have historically faced serious challenges and barriers to impeding their access to employment. We know also that gender inequality is particularly highlighted for people with disability. I think 20% of women and 59% of men with disabilities are employment, compared with 32% of women and 71% of men without disabilities. In lower middle income countries, the loss to GDP from the exclusion of women and men with disabilities from the labour market is estimated to be between 3 and 7%. And given the diversity of circumstances faced by people with disabilities and the different barriers and discrimination they experience, there are multiple pathways to economic empowerment. The nature of the economy, laws and policies, adequate infrastructure and services, and equal access to resources, information and networks all play a crucial role in ensuring access to decent work. The UK government's Department for International Development does prioritise and recognise the importance and transformative power of ensuring people with disabilities gain improved access to employment opportunities. We want to empower people with disabilities, particularly women, to access and have choice and control over their economic opportunities. Routes to Empowerment was one of the four central themes of the Global Disability Summit, which DFID co-hosted in 2018 in the UK with the International Disability Alliance and the Government of Kenya. And it's also one of the four strategic priorities of DFID's Disability Inclusion Strategy. On the summit, which we felt was a major success, it did establish strong leadership from and broadened engagement with emerging partners and new donors. It was attended by approximately 1,200 high-level delegates from around the world, including CEOs from dozens of private sector organisations. There were a total of 968 individual commitments made at the summit, but importantly, 139 referred to the theme of economic empowerment, and that's about 14.5% of all commitments. Within this, we had 13 national governments, multilaterals, donors and businesses committed to enabling inclusive environments in the workplace. 11 national governments, multilaterals, donors and businesses investing in skills development for decent work, and 8 national governments, multilaterals, donors and businesses improving access to decent work. And since the summit, the ILO has established a new national business and disability network in China and India. All the commitments made at the summit are available on our website if you want to look at that. In terms of private sector commitments, the UK has a successful track record on engaging with the private sector on disability inclusion, although we recognise we can also do more. In the lead up to the summit, we worked very closely to galvanise interest and secure commitments from a range of private sector organisations, including Unilever, the Ford Foundation, Cisco, Microsoft and British Telecommunications, to provide economic opportunities for people with disabilities. A total of 13 private sector organisations and foundations made commitments at the summit, and key areas of progress against these commitments include the Ford Foundation, who have started a new Disability Justice Fund initiative in the US, which is bringing donors and disability activists together to help catalyse change within the philanthropic sector. Unilever plc has been working on its commitments under the Routes to Economic Empowerment theme by starting work to realise its vision of becoming the #1 employer of choice for disabled people by 2025. And they made a very high-profile commitment to support disability inclusion in business with a worldwide call to action for business. And they also discussed this at Davos this year. Manion Daniels Limited has begun providing guidance on the use of the Washington Group questions to applicants and grant holders, and by March 2019 they reported 66 grantees included disability as a word in their reporting. Open Society Foundations have started to include disability lens in its programming on women and girls, and their women's rights portfolio has adopted an intersectional approach. A proportion of grantees from within this funding window are organisations of women with disabilities, but at the same time all grantees are being encouraged to include women with disabilities in their activities. And finally, the International Foundation of Royal Dutch Cantalis has completed professional training of deaf adults to ensure they run workshops for parents on the importance of early childhood development and education in Uganda, Zambia, Rwanda, and with a planned rollout of the programme in rural areas in those countries. So as you can see, the commitments made at the summit are delivering some real action. I mentioned earlier that DFID has a disability inclusion strategy, and we're very pleased that one of the 4 priorities in that is economic empowerment. We've been doing quite a lot within our programmes to develop this theme, and I want to give you a few examples of those. So in Kenya, we have a strategic partnership with the Kenyan government and Kenyan businesses, which aims at economically empowering people with disability in Kenya. It will establish a dynamic partnership model which demonstrates private sector leadership as a driving force behind inclusive economic growth. And over the longer term, we hope this partnership model will be replicated and used to stimulate inclusive economic growth more broadly. We in the UK have the CDC, which is a development finance institution owned by the UK government, and that's working with the IFC, which is part of the World Bank Group, to develop a good practice note on disability inclusion linked to IFC performance standard. And we hope this will be used as a benchmark across the industry, which will help to raise the bar across the board. We're also developing a good practice note on inclusive stability to support inclusion of people with disabilities alongside other marginalised groups in fragile and conflict-affected states. We are working across UK government to ensure that all ODA, including things like the Prosperity Fund, removes barriers to people with disabilities in these areas. Under the Responsible, Accountable and Transparent Enterprise, DFID has also funded the Ethical Trading Initiative to produce baseline guidance for global firms to mainstream disability inclusion in their supply chains. And there are outlines within this for the case for employing people with disabilities, challenging the myths that exist around disability inclusion in the workplace, and these highlight best practice. So there's a lot going on. We need to do more. We do think that working together we can achieve real progress, particularly in some of those areas where you might not think so. So in some of the real conflict and fragile areas of the world, but also in those areas where we see good development. And we are working, as I say, across the world, other programs in Kenya, Bangladesh, Uganda and Nigeria, but I'm afraid I've run out of time. But I'm happy to answer questions. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Yes, you did run out of time, but it was very interesting and a very rich list of initiatives and the linkages and with key development and economic and gender empowerment priorities and inclusion. So it was very interesting. Thank you so much. Our next speaker, Frivut Sium, who is an independent expert and former coordinator of the Ethiopian National Business and Disability Network. The network embraces companies and other employers as its members to address disability issue from a business perspective. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and it's motivating to see this platform talking about disability inclusion in business and this big platform and this forum. I'll be sharing the experience from Ethiopia. I'm from Ethiopia, how we engage private sectors in the inclusion of persons with disabilities. So Ethiopian Business and Disability Network was established in 2015 by the help of ILO. So what we do is we bridge the gap that employers have when it comes to inclusion of persons with disability in the workplace. So how we engage, we have different packages. We have about 5 packages to engage with private sectors. The first one is the awareness raising program. Because employment of persons with disability can and will only be ensured when each and every sector is embraced in disability inclusion strategies. And for that, we need to shift the dominant negative discourse on the potentials of persons with disabilities. That's by supporting people unlearn their knowledge of disability and by sharing the path to disability inclusion. So in our training program, we talk about reasonable accommodation, which is making adjustment in the workplace. For example, if we have a blind employee, how we find different softwares to help the employee. It might be JAWS software. We also talk about accessibility, how we can make conducive for persons with disabilities. The other package is we provide accessibility audit service for our members. This is to create barrier-free environment for the employees. Let's say that we have an autistic employee, so that person may need a quiet space to work on, so we we work with employers to be more inclusive in their workplace. Also, not only this one, but we also focus on the physical accessibility of the workplace, the chairs, if they have elevator or not, or whether they need ramps and so on. The third package is sharing publication on business and disability. So every Monday, there is Monday morning memo that we share with our members. So in that's a very interactive platform because they learn what disability is and how we engage people with disability in our business sector, and how we can also be competitive by bringing a diverse workforce. So we also got good feedback from our members with this interactive platform. The fourth package is we facilitate internship because one of the challenges that employers face is that they are not able to find employees with disabilities, whether it can be for formal employment or for internship. So we link the employees with disabilities with the employers, so they could do some internship, or afterward they might have a job retention. The first, but the last but not least, is we have experience sharing and recognition event. So every year there will be Disability Inclusive Employers Award, where role models of employers would share their experience, their success to other employees. So in this event, we also share stories of successful employees who, with disabilities who got internship or job and then become successful in their job. So that's what we do with the Ethiopian Business and Disability Network. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation also on how to mobilize business at the national level and get business to exchange and to learn and be building their capacity to play their role. Last but not least, in the first round of panelists, we have Thierry Fiquet from Socio Plus, which is the European Union expertise on social protection, labor and employment. Thierry, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's an honor to be here. I would like, first of all, to thank my colleagues and partners from Bridging the Gap, and of course, our colleagues from the High Committee for the Human Rights for their invitation here. Through different peer-to-peer international cooperation and expertise missions, experts and practitioners from European Union states, I've worked and shared with their peers worldwide through the EU facility Socio Plus, in defining new challenges and sharing concrete roadmaps, tools, and methods to implement policies and acts, how to facilitate access to employment for people with disabilities. My purpose will be based on few recommendations and lessons learned from the ground. That is to say, based on a choice of 4 actions we implemented worldwide. The first one about Peru in Latin America. With our partner was the Ministry of Labor and Promotion of Employment and the Public Employment Centers. The second one was in Ivory Coast in Africa, where we worked with the Public Employment Service and the Ministry. The third one is still in Georgia, where the social partners were the requesting partners with the Labor Inspection Department. And the fourth one is about Azerbaijan, where the requesting partner was the National Research Center for Labor and Employment. I sadly won't have the time to detail each one of these different actions, but I am going to try to summarize the great lines and maybe to feed hope and share, in fact, that things are possible. So what are the challenges and few lessons we learned about those concrete expertise missions? The first challenge, in order to ensure the implementation of the rights of persons with disabilities and equal employment opportunities with others, It is recommended, and this is possible, to constantly improve the legal framework, taking into account the changing needs of the labor market, employers, people with disabilities, and the society as a whole. It is possible to improve the disability determination system in order to move from the medical assessment model to the social and economical one, to refuse the use of incapacitated entry, turn from the medical to the social and economical key entry. This is possible from this first challenge to abolish the list of jobs, as we could observe in different countries, a list of jobs that people with disabilities are not allowed to obtain as a non-eligibility preset. This is possible to establish a control mechanism that ensures proper implementation of the existing legal framework governing the rights. For the second challenge, in order to improve the employment of people with disabilities, this is possible to create effective employer support system, providing effective active labor market support measures regarding wages, qualifications, and training, and mostly adaptation of the workplace and working environment. That was possible to eliminate the impossibility in the fact for relevant institutions to inspect businesses, ensure effective control or observation on how businesses are practicing. This is possible to increase the inclusion in the open labor markets through, for example, implementation of a specific closed labor market, and to use specialized workplaces as an entry and inclusive point to the open labor market for those who need a transition period for their integration in the open labor market, for instance. This is possible to improve the employment public services in providing information on the labor market and ensure its transparency, with no discrimination in the dissemination of job vacancies and the role of employment counselors in helping people in taking their place in an open labor market. The third challenge, in order to improve the knowledge of the population and reducing the gaps between supply and demand, it is possible to elaborate different LMI systems, labor market information system. On the one hand, to collect and systemize statistical data in the public and private sectors, in the open labor market, but in entrepreneurship too, and in the VAT system. The fourth challenge was about technical vocational guidance, and it's possible to ensure that the environment is in educational institutions is suited to the needs, and not only in the specialized schools or training centers, but also in ordinary vocational educational schools. This is important for us to promote, and know it's possible to promote and professionalize the non-formal vocational training, so that people can acquire the necessary knowledge for creating and developing their own business and improving their qualifications. The fifth challenge is in order to ensure a reasonable accommodation to persons with disabilities in the workplace. This is possible to establish financial support measures for employers for the adaptation of workplace to the needs. In the same time, to improve the participation of people themselves in the vocational and professional rehabilitation this time, and return to work programs for persons with disabilities. That was possible to ensure that the vocational rehabilitation services were accessible to all people of working age, and not only the youth. And finally, to ensure global taking into account of all the different components of the major issue on inclusive acts for people with disabilities, and not only policies. It should be recommended and possible to ensure and make possible the participation of any stakeholder, social partners, governments, civil society, and at the prior role, businesses and people themselves, in a specific and effective and professionalized governance. That would be possible to ensure more than a single sensibilization of the economical actors, but an engagement and concrete responsibilization of the management line in each business and corporate. The sentence, "This is not my problem as a chief, but you know the problem will be with my team," is too many heard, and so often. And just to end the thing, I would like just to tell something I heard yesterday by the High Committee, the High Commissioner. What can a European Union do about the human rights defenders? The European Union has in particular to ensure that European Union cooperation funds, particularly instruments dedicated to the promotion and defense of human rights, are known and are accessible by the beneficiary population. That's what I try to do today.
Thank you very much, Thierry, and thanks indeed to all the panelists. As I flagged earlier, we will have a closing remark from Behanu Tefara on behalf of the International Disability Alliance. But for now, and just before opening up the floor for questions, I omitted by mistake in my introductory remarks to recognize the organizations, the co-organizers of the session. So in addition to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the session was organized in collaboration with the ILO, the International Disability Alliance, the Office of the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the EU-funded Bridging the Gap project that we've heard about, inclusive policies and services for equal rights of persons with disabilities. So thanks to the co-organizers, and I would now like to open up the floor for comments or questions to our distinguished panelists.
Good morning to many old friends on the panel and in the room. Could one or more of the speakers comment on how these issues can be reflected in the reporting on the Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities when that takes place in New York?
Thank you, Richard. Yes, the lady here in the front.
Okay, so thanks everyone for sharing the very rich experiences, which is quite insightful. My name is Akiko. I'm a lawyer from Japan. So actually, I was so excited when I found this agenda. You know, they're under this year. So yeah, congratulations for all. And my question is about operational level grievance mechanism, which is the complaint, the system within the companies. So actually, I'm working both on business and human rights and person with disabilities. So whenever I provide advice on human rights due diligence for my clients, I try to make sure every step of human rights due diligence is reflecting the CRPD. So I think one of the issues that persons with disability may frequently experience at workplace is discrimination against them based on disabilities. But then if they try to file that case to any kind of complaint system within companies, I think maybe, confidentiality can be harmed. So I'm wondering if any of you could share experience or practical action to overcome this issue and ensure the access to remedy for persons with disability at workplace. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take a few more questions before going back to the panel. We have the lady here to the left.
I thank you very much, the panelists, for your presentation. I have my first question for Ms. Freehood-Sear. What are the concrete steps for an employer to make sure that the workplace is inclusive for persons with disability? And my second question is for Ms. Carla Bonimo. And there is a link between the publication you presented with the UN CRPD? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have here and then in the back. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shayan Siraj. I'm representing Bangladesh Employers Federation. And family business of over 70 years. Two specific points I wanted to share. One is that Bangladesh Business Disability Network, initiated by ILO and funded by DFID, they've actually done quite a bit of work this year in getting people to understand, or the private sector to understand, the benefits of including having disability inclusion in the workforce. So one achievement that happened this year was that the government of Bangladesh is actually now giving an incentive for private businesses to have disability in the workforce. But where I think the due diligence was lacked is that they've set the target so high that it's kind of acting as a hindrance for the private sector to take this forward seriously. They've asked the private sector to have a minimum of 10% of their workforce from the disability to unlock these financial incentives. I think the number is a bit high. Perhaps it can be done on a slab-by-slab basis, 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 6 to 8, and accordingly it can unlock different benefits, and this would encourage the private sector a lot more. The second point is that we're seeing, the private sector is seeing a lot of benefits of having disability in the workforce, but one hindrance which the government is not helping us with is the accessibility of transportation. That seems to be a very critical point, because although there's interest, it's actually very difficult to bring the person into the office or factory environment. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Mia in the back.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to make a comment that in South Africa, how we champion the convention of the convention itself, people with disability rights, is that we have a special piece of legislation called the Employment Equity Act, and it makes it compulsory for the state and the private stakeholders, that is business, to employ 7% of the workforce with people with disabilities and give them all the necessary facilities itself. And where the Human Rights Commission comes in, what we then do is we monitor annually the performance of the state in meeting those obligations itself. What we found is that the private sector is coming to the party, but the state is dragging its feet. And so I just thought we'll share that experience here as well, so that we're also saying that people with disabilities are also able to do every other thing, like every other human being, because they have human rights as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. One more question here.
Hello, I'm Robson from Global Attitude Institute from Brazil. In the first point, I'd like to say that according to our research from 2017, in Brazil, just 1% of people with some kind of disabilities are working at this moment, for example. So it's a really low rate of people with disabilities working there. But at the other side, we see just a barrier in which companies are just contracting these people, admitting these people just for accomplishing some quotas. So my question in this scenario is that how can we increase the career development? How we can discuss the career development for these people with disabilities? And in another point, I'd like to mention about technology. For the next years, we are commenting about that technology will extinguish millions of jobs and positions in all the world, not for just people with disabilities, but in general. And what do you think about this, about technology for the future? It will be at one point a disadvantage for these people with disabilities, but at the other side, maybe technology can help people with disability to break barriers and take new jobs, create new jobs for new positions to the future. Is that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll go back to the panel. There were a couple of targeted questions to specific members of the panel, so we'll maybe start with Freevoort. But you can reflect on the question that were directed to you, but also, of course, any other issues that came up. Thank you.
Thank you. So what are the main actions to be taken by employers to be more disability inclusive employment? I would put it in three categories. The first one is in recruitment and hiring. The second one is career development, and third, accessibility and accommodation. So in recruitment and hiring, employers should offer internship or job just to try out persons with disabilities in the workforce. Also, in their job post, they should clearly specify that they would encourage persons with disabilities. They should also raise awareness about disability on recruiters and also interviews, because there are times that interviews would be biased because they are disabled people. And the other point is employers should collaborate with disabled people organizations and other organizations working on disability inclusion, because they would help them, for example, linking employees with disabilities with the employers. On career development, there has to be a fair treatment of persons with disabilities once they are in the workforce. This might be reflected in their salary or promotion or any benefit that the employer is giving. In career development, there has to be also fair access for professional development programs. This might be different trainings that are given for employees. So employers should make sure that these trainings are accessible for persons with disabilities. In terms of their materials, if they have employees who are blind, they should make sure that they have electronic materials for them. And also, if they have someone with neurodivergent, they should make sure that they have all the materials and accessible spaces for all of them. Also, informations in the workforce has to be accessible. Let's say that we posted some job, but it's not accessible for blind, if it's not in Braille or whether it's not sent through email. In terms of...
Excuse me, I've just been told there's a problem with the captioning. Okay, so we should just wait until the connection is restored. Yeah, so will you flag when it is? Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. Just hold the thought and we'll fix it as quickly as possible. Anything we can do to test? No. Testing.
I think this is the answer to the question about technology.
Indeed. I think we will have to continue because we will be running out of time as we are trying to fix, get another line for the. So I think I'm conscious that that we don't have a lot of time left, and I think that at least for the people in the room, that would. So if you want to carry on and then maybe close, because I want to also pass on to some of the other panelists. Thank you. At least the microphones are working, I think.
So in terms of accessibility and accommodation, employers should make sure that there is reasonable accommodation, there is adjusted workplace for persons with disabilities, because that's how they can be productive and successful with their job. So this shows that being disability inclusive employer is more than bringing persons with disabilities on board. It includes creating accessible and non-discriminatory work environment where disabled people feel safe and welcomed. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I'll pass on to Carla. There was also some questions directed at you.
Yes, thank you. I got a question about the link of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability and the publication. Yes, indeed, the convention is the framework of the publication, particularly Article 27 on work, stating that the right of people with disabilities to work on an equal basis with others. And also, I would like to state that the convention is at the heart of the 2030 agenda as regards people with disabilities and inspires all the right-based approach of this agenda. I would also like to comment, to invite the colleague from Brazil to consult the publication as regards the technological revolution and the skills changes. We approach this issue indeed stating that there will be some changes, and this poses also opportunities and challenges for people with disabilities regarding the issue of new jobs while rendering others obsolete, or the wage gap that is set to widen in the gig economy, for example, in what this means for people with disabilities. I would also like to comment one specific issue that is not object of a best practice here, but it was discussed when preparing this panel, is about the importance of disability in non-financial reporting. Eleni stated this. From the UNS Foundation, we have developed important work with the Global Reporting Initiative on this issue. I'm aware that Mr. Howitt knows about it. He's an old friend of our work, and so I would invite you all to consult this. In Spain, we have a recent law that sets the obligation to report on disability and accessibility for the companies affected by the law. This is compulsory now. And just to finish, I would like to share also a framework that is reflected in the publication, which is what we call the 360 approach towards people with disabilities from business, meaning that people with disabilities can be seen as stakeholders in a broad sense. They can be employees, they can be customers, suppliers, consumers, employers, investors, members of the community, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the panel? I would ask you to be a little bit brief, Elena, because we are sort of running short of time, and I'm happy to say that the captioning is now working.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Just to reflect back to our colleague from Japan, Kiko, what you mentioned is right. Discrimination is, and really the difficulties in disclosing is important, and this is where we need leadership sponsorship. We need more people with disabilities on leadership positions to guide by example, not just people with visual impairments in call centers, for example. We need career development, and through the employee resource groups to engage and let the employees feel that they have a safe space to not only mention discrimination, but to actually disclose their disability. There are so many employees that they are scared of disclosing their disability, especially the invisible ones. So yes, these two approaches. So really, we need to look at the gender employee resource groups, the LGBTQI plus resource groups, and really take the example for them and start organizing and helping the employees to disclose that. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Carla for mentioning the 360 approach, especially because in venture philanthropy, there are philanthropy advisors that they have high net worth individuals as clients. that they have disabilities or they have somebody in their family with a disability. And we need to look at people with disabilities as employees, as employers, as talent, and as entrepreneurs. A 360 approach to the environment. And as I mentioned, it's almost $8.1 trillion disposable income. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Dylan, do you want to reflect on some of the comments?
Thanks very much. Just to very quickly reflect on two. The delegate who talked about reporting on these issues in New York, certainly the UK is a very active member of the Human Rights Council. We've just appointed a new roving human rights ambassador. And we are looking in particular at a range of issues, including disability, and how those can be reporting. But I also wanted to mention, certainly in the sector I work, which is the humanitarian sector, we've very much looked at things like the Refugee Compact, which was agreed last year. It has quite a lot in there on disability, a lot in terms of refugees' ability to work, and I hope that we can start to make better connections between these different issues. We also have some of the things like the Charter for Inclusion of Persons with Disability and Humanitarian Action, and I think there's a growing recognition that a lot of these, the people in crisis and disabled people in crisis are in long-term protracted contexts, and that's really where we need to start to look much more at the sort of jobs perspectives. And a lot of this is reflected in the humanitarian resolutions which go into New York. So clearly we need to make a little bit more of a link between some of the sectors, but I certainly think there's opportunities for us to do more. And then maybe just on the colleague from Brazil, I think it should be an opportunity, the technology piece. I mean, we're doing a lot of work now on data, looking at big data, artificial intelligence, and really how can that actually help us to identify much more the specific needs of different groups of people within particularly protracted crisis and humanitarian settings. And I know the Red Cross conference is in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be looking at some of those issues as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And Thierry, I'm sorry to have you go last again. That wasn't really intentional. So,
yes,
but please.
My pleasure is always to be the last, but not the least. Sorry. Just an example, we worked in Azerbaijan, but based obviously by the CRPD and mostly Article 9 and 27 to access to employment. I often, like a public employment service practitioner, observed that we had a representation about disability, even people we see their disability. We have to know, and this is clearly a social representation, that 80% of people with disabilities have disability that you won't ever see. And they feel this disability not as an issue because it was just shared by professional and technicians on the subject, that the first issue for people with disability is not their disability itself. It was the access to information and just to make it forget. And what I observed on the ground by employers, but technical practitioners, is that everywhere experimentations were implemented, all what was done for the people with disabilities was finally very good for everybody and every workers. So if the disability is often represented as like something very hard to go through, I really think that working on disability on workplace, but in employment, is a very good thing for everybody. And I can prove that. I don't have the time, but I can.
Thank you very much. And now it's my great pleasure to invite Behanu Tefera to deliver some closing remarks. So Behanu is the Executive Director of the African Disability Forum and represents the International Disability Alliance at this meeting. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, distinguished guests, excellencies, fellow panelists. It's a pleasure to address you here today on behalf of the International Disability Alliance. I had prepared a concluding remark which was much more bigger than what I'm going to say here, but due to time, I'll try to make it very brief and at least try to reflect in some of the questions that come from the floor, because it's worth taking time on that. So the organizations of persons with disabilities are actually created to represent persons with disabilities globally, and with a huge aim of unifying and amplifying voice of persons with disabilities and do advocacy at all levels. The International Disability Alliance, which is an alliance of 14 DPOs, which includes 8 global member organizations and 6 regional organizations, is comprised of 1,100 networks of DPOs, which represent more than 1 billion people with disability globally. In IDA, we believe the DPO play a significant and important role in promoting inclusive employment, and to promote also the inclusive employment policies and fight for equal opportunities of persons with disabilities in both formal and informal labor markets. It's with that understanding that IDA recently set up a task team on inclusive livelihood. This is to inform the discussion around framing what inclusive employment means. This is in the context of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and in a way to inform the implementation of Sustainable Development Goal number 8. Inclusive employment goes beyond hiring persons with disabilities. It also is about being inclusive of all persons with disabilities, which includes the most marginalized persons with disabilities and those with invisible disabilities. There are a lot of underrepresented groups or marginalized groups of persons with disability in the labor market, and it's really hard to integrate them within the labor force market. Inclusive employment is also about non-discrimination. It's about creating the enabling environment and the support services for persons with disabilities in our work environment. It's also about providing reasonable accommodation, accessibility, and it's also about the means to maintain the employment of persons with disability within the work environment. DPOs at global level, be it regional or national, have been engaging in different activities beyond advocating for employment of persons with disabilities. This includes education and life learning processes and opportunities that our colleagues has been talking about on how to retain people with disability in their workforce. It takes certain steps to make sure that we have people with disability in our environment, including in companies. This includes aligning the national policies and company policies within our organization. Already from the floor, it was raised that how are we going to address the issue of discrimination in the workforce environment. This is where, by setting up complaint mechanisms within the organizational functional processes. In addition, we also need to create and build partnership with organizations of persons with disability, because they are the ones who can identify persons with disabilities, who can promote their talents, bring them in the work environment, and make sure that they stay within the work environment. From the floor, there were a couple of questions, especially on the issues of reporting in New York, on the implementation of the global agenda, on how we can make sure that it's done in compliance with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. International Disability Alliance have been working with its members and other partners to report on the inclusion of people with disability in the implementation of the Agenda 2030. In 2017, we launched the global report on engagement of DPOs and people with disabilities. And there were other national reports on the implementation of SDG and how people with disability are affected and how they can be integrated in national policies. All these reports can be found on the IDA website. You can refer them, and we can also share some contacts here with the colleagues from the International Disability Alliance. I want to conclude by calling up on all companies and governments here to make sure that whatever policies and developmental plans that they are putting in the ground is in compliance with the UN Convention, and also in partnership and with discussion on the table or around the table with organizations of persons with disability, because inclusion can't wait anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are out of time. I think, right on the dot. So I want to thank all the panelists for the excellent remarks and for being very timely. And I want to thank every one of you who came and for the good questions. So I think we should give each other a hand. Thank you.